On February 13, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump was convinced that he had achieved what no one else could, bringing Russian President Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table. After a 90-minute phone call with Putin, Trump was confident that he had brokered a pathway to peace in Ukraine. He publicly declared that an end to the war was within reach, and that his personal influence had played a key role in getting Putin to consider a ceasefire. However, just weeks later, everything fell apart. Not only did Putin reject a ceasefire outright, but he also refused any further peace negotiations, leaving Trump humiliated and the world on edge. Trump's optimism about peace talks was largely based on his February 2025 call with Putin. During this conversation, the U.S. president believed he had reached an understanding with the Russian leader about a potential ceasefire. As a result, Trump arranged for a team of U.S. diplomats to travel to Saudi Arabia, where they met with Russian officials to further discuss a framework for peace. These discussions were initially viewed as promising. Both sides maintained an air of optimism in public, fueling speculation that an agreement was imminent. But there was a glaring problem. Ukraine was not involved in these discussions. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who had been battling against Russian aggression since February 2022, was notably absent from the negotiation process. Trump downplayed this issue, arguing that his approach to diplomacy would bring results faster than traditional methods. He even criticized Zelensky for not doing enough to negotiate peace. This caused further tensions between the two leaders, with Zelensky and his administration insisting that no peace deal could be reached without Ukraine's direct involvement. Then, on March 7, 2025, Russia abruptly announced that there would be no ceasefire, no negotiations, no compromise. Putin's government made it clear that their military campaign would continue until Russia had achieved all of its objectives in Ukraine. This move blindsided Trump and his supporters, leaving his credibility in tatters. While it may have appeared that Putin led Trump on before pulling the rug out from under him, this move was entirely calculated. The Russian president never intended to halt his invasion, and Trump's attempts at diplomacy were likely seen as nothing more than an opportunity to gauge U.S. strategy. There are several key reasons why Putin ultimately refused to engage in peace talks. Territorial ambitions and strategic resources. Putin has always made it clear that his goal is to restore Russian dominance over Ukraine, and he is not willing to settle for anything less. The regions that Russia currently occupies, such as Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk, hold immense strategic and economic value. Ukraine is home to vast reserves of minerals critical for modern technology and military production, including lithium, titanium, and graphite. These materials are essential for aerospace engineering, semiconductors, and missile systems. Allowing Ukraine to retain control over these resources would strengthen Kiev's position in the long run, something Putin cannot afford. A ceasefire would only give Ukraine time to fortify its defenses and rebuild its military. Putin understands that the longer the war drags on, the more pressure it places on Ukraine and its Western allies. Russia has made significant territorial gains, and agreeing to a ceasefire now would mean freezing the conflict at a point where Ukraine still holds valuable leverage. Instead, Putin's strategy is to push further, aiming to capture more land and weaken Ukraine's military capability before considering any diplomatic resolution. Moreover, Putin likely sees Western unity as fragile. The longer the war continues, the greater the risk that Western support for Ukraine will weaken due to political shifts, economic pressures, and war fatigue among NATO nations. By rejecting peace talks now, Putin is betting that his adversaries will eventually lose their resolve. Putin's grip on power in Russia is largely based on his image as a strong, decisive leader. Admitting to peace talks, especially negotiations influenced by Trump, would make him appear weak in the eyes of Russian elites and the military establishment. Over the past year, Putin has cracked down on opposition figures and military officials who questioned his leadership. Any sign of hesitation or compromise could be perceived as a vulnerability, potentially leading to internal unrest. By doubling down on the war, Putin reinforces his position as an uncompromising leader who will stop at nothing to achieve victory. With Putin's rejection of the ceasefire, the war is set to escalate further. The US has proposed a 30-day suspension of hostilities, but Russia has yet to respond to this offer. This proposed ceasefire would include a halt to aerial and naval operations, which could limit Russia's ability to launch large-scale offensives. However, given Putin's recent statements, it is unlikely that Moscow will agree to any temporary pause unless it serves a clear strategic purpose. Meanwhile, Ukraine is preparing for another wave of Russian offensives. Western nations continue to supply Ukraine with military aid, but questions remain about how long they can maintain this level of support. European nations are facing economic strain due to high energy costs and inflation, while political divisions in the US could impact future aid packages for Ukraine. As for Trump, his failure to secure a peace deal with Putin has dealt a serious blow to his credibility. He had positioned himself as a master negotiator, capable of brokering deals that others could not. But now, his supporters are left questioning whether his approach to diplomacy was naive. Instead of emerging as a peacemaker, he has been left sidelined by a leader who never intended to negotiate in the first place. Putin's refusal to negotiate marks a turning point in the Ukraine war. With no end in sight, the conflict is likely to intensify, drawing in more resources, military personnel, and political stakes. The failure of peace talks means that Ukraine and its allies must now prepare for prolonged warfare, while Russia continues its brutal campaign. This betrayal by Putin is a stark reminder of the realities of global politics. Diplomacy alone will not stop the war. Only decisive military strategy and unwavering international support for Ukraine will determine its outcome. The world watches as the conflict unfolds, knowing that the next moves made by Russia, Ukraine, and the West could shape global security for years to come. What do you think about Putin's rejection of the ceasefire? Was Trump's attempt at diplomacy doomed from the start? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.